just to let you all know. So hopefully that's okay with you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to talk about the roster verification. It's always a fun topic. And I see there are quite a few questions that are in the chat. It seems like most of them are mainly about how are you going to be able to support your teachers? But there are a few questions like about attendance. We'll go over that. And so we'll try to get through each one of your questions. So today, what I am hoping to do is to give you an overview of the roster verification process so that you can have a really good understanding of what the roles are for teachers and what the roles are for the school administrator / roster verifier. And I say that because principals now have the opportunity to assign the role of roster verifier to a teacher or to an assistant principal or to another leader in your building. So you have the opportunity to do that as principals, and so that you don't have to do everything yourself. The other thing that I want to do is to be able to take you through some of the resources that are available for you so that you will have the support that you need as you go through this roster verification process. So first, let's just briefly talk about the purpose of, and I'm going to abbreviate and call it RV, the purpose of the RV process. So you'll hear me saying that. And basically, the reason we go through this process is we want to make sure that the appropriate proportions of instructional responsibility is assigned to the teacher and the student, so that the EVAAS teacher value added reports reflect the appropriate amount of time that the student was enrolled in the teacher class and that the teacher was available to teach their students. And then we also want to make sure that in a fair manner, the EVAAS teacher value added report is an accurate reflection of the amount of growth that students in a particular teacher's classroom received, that growth is fair, that the amount of growth that a student had was fair based on what the teacher was able to do. So those are the two purposes of the roster verification process. There's no other way to determine who is standing in front of a teacher unless we tell the system that. So we have to physically go in and say that this teacher was available and the student was also available, and together there was teaching and learning happening at the same time. So I'm going to be talking about, right now we are in the fall verification window, and the fall window is specifically for high schools. The middle schools are not participating in the fall roster verification window, and so everybody will participate in the spring. The spring dates have not come out yet, so we don't know exactly when the spring window is going to open. So you will see when I put these dates up here, they're specific dates for the fall, and so the preview window for the fall has already ended. So that's December 14th through January 8th. The spring dates have not come out, but it's important for you to know that when you get the email that says that the preview window is now open for school administrators, and you will get an email, or if you're in the system as a roster verifier, you'll also get an email from EVAAS that says the preview window is now. This preview window is extremely important because this is your time to check to make sure that all of your teachers are in the EVAAS system, and that they also have the ability to verify rosters. So there's actually 2 locations that you have to add a teacher if a teacher is new to your building. You have to create an account for them in EVAAS, and the way you do that is you go up to that admin tab, which is in the top right-hand corner. If you're in the system, there's a tab that says admin, that principals and assistant principals have access to. That's where you would go and add teachers. There's a link in there that says create a new user. Before you create the new user, make sure that the teacher is not listed in there, because otherwise you're going to be duplicating the you're going to be adding another account for a teacher. So once the teacher is added in the EVAAS system, when you go in, and I'll show you this on my system in just a second, when you go in to EVAAS, you're also going to see a link that says active window, spring roster verification, or if you're in the fall, it'll say active window, fall roster verification window. At that point, you will also see a list of all of your staff. Any new teacher that you added into EVAAS, and it's weird because you're still in EVAAS, but these two parts of EVAAS do not talk to one another. So once you've added the teacher into EVAAS, you also have to add them under the roster verification section. So you actually are adding teachers in two places. A lot of times, principals miss that because you don't realize that you have to add them in that second space. And the reason it's important to do it during the preview window is because once the teacher window opens, when a teacher goes in, they're either not able to access EVAAS, or they're not able to access their EVAAS rosters. And so they're going to start sending you emails or calling you and just saying, I can't get in the system, I can't get in the system. And it just creates a lot of confusion. So if you could go in during this window, all you need to do is to check to make sure that every teacher on your staff is listed, and then go into the fall or the spring roster verification window, whichever it is, and make sure that the teachers are listed there as well. So that's the preview window. Once that window closes, principals, you can't do anything else to the teacher rosters. The only thing you can do is to add the teachers, but you can't delete any rosters. You can't add students to rosters. You can't do anything. So the teacher verification window for the fall is going on right now, and it's actually about to close in 3 days. So they have from January 9th to January 29th. And the spring, it'll probably be about a month, sometime in March, or maybe probably April, sometime in April or May is when the spring window is going to open up. So during this teacher window, teachers then have the opportunity to go in, they can add and remove rosters. So for example, if a teacher has a roster they're in a middle school and they have a roster for Math 1, they can and they don't teach Math 1, they can delete that Math 1 roster off. It's no problem for them to do that. And the same thing during the preview window, if you have a teacher that's showing up that's no longer at your building, go ahead and delete the teacher's roster off. So you can add, delete teachers. If for some reason, if a principal did not create a roster for you, then you can, during your teacher verification window, you can go in as a teacher and add your roster. So if you know you have another section of English that you teach, then go ahead and it's very simple in the system. It just gives you a drop-down menu, a list of the courses. You just select that course and add the roster. And then what it does is it gives you a drop-down menu for all of the students. So you type in, you do have to have a list of your students' names, and you will check if there's a checkbox. I can't show you this because I don't have access to a teacher account, but literally it gives you a drop down of all the students in your school, and then you just take your list and check the names and then hit submit, and then that's how your roster is created. Also during the teacher window, teachers actually go in, and I can show you something that looks very similar to this. This is where they would actually claim their instructional responsibility. So this is where they will put the percentages. They'll put the percentage of time that they were available to the student, and then also the percent of time that the student was enrolled in their classroom. So this gets a little complicated, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through the process. And then by the end of the window, the teachers submit their rosters to the principals, or if the teachers are not done, on January 30th, all the rosters go up to the principal or to the school level without teachers having to do anything. And then this is when the principals or the roster verifiers for the school, this is when your work actually begins again. This is your second round. So your role during this time frame is to do all of those things that you see listed on the screen. You can add or delete rosters. So if you didn't get a chance to delete those teachers during the preview window who are no longer in your building, you'll have the opportunity to do that now during this window. You need to look at your teacher rosters. There cannot be any overclaimed students, and I'll show you what this looks like. If you have 2 teachers in your building and they're both wanting to claim that AIG super scoring student that made a whole bunch of growth, or you suspect they're going to make a lot of growth, both of them can't claim the student at 100%. If they did share the student, then they need to work together to figure out what that percentage is. The confusion usually comes between the teacher of record and, say, the AIG teacher or the special ed teacher or the ELL teacher, because those are the kids who are either being pulled out or pushed in, and people are working with them other than the teacher. And so hopefully they've been keeping record about the amount of time they are working with students. But you as the principal or the roster verifier, you have to look to make sure that the numbers look very close to being right. So if there's a student where a teacher is saying she's only or he's only claiming them for 50%, then there should be a valid reason for that only 50%. It could be that the teacher was out on maternity leave and she was only at your school for half the time. That's a valid reason. Could be that the student was new to your building and they came to your school, you know, in the middle of the year. Then that student, you know, could be underclaimed. It's going to get a little squirrely because of the switch. And I know some of you have already said in your questions, the switch from the virtual academy to Plan B or Plan B to the virtual academy. It will only get squirrely if the teachers changed. So an example would be if I taught a student during the virtual academy and I was the teacher of record, but the student decided to switch over to Plan B and Michelle is now the teacher of record. Michelle is going to take full responsibility for that student, but only 50% of the time because they switched right at the semester. So that's going to be right at 50%. So that student actually is going to be underclaimed, even though we know that student received instruction. Now the teacher, and it's up to the principals how you want to handle this, because the teacher, me as the teacher for a virtual academy, I could still technically claim that other 50% if I wanted to. So that's a building level decision that you can make. But what I would urge you to do is to be consistent with that decision, with those kinds of decisions. Okay, so I know you guys have some questions, but I want to go over these frequently asked questions. And if someone could put, Spencer, if one of you could put this link in the chat so that they can access this for me. Because the frequently asked questions document that DPI put together is actually pretty good and it covers a lot of questions. Can someone access that and put it in the chat for me?
I did.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. Okay, so if you guys want to go ahead and pull this this document up. And if you could just give me a thumbs up if you have it open. Okay, good. Shane, you and Michelle are on my screen, so I'm basing everything off of what you guys are doing. So I just wanted to go over, I do urge you to read the entire document, but I wanted to quickly bring your attention to some questions that I know teachers will ask you as they're going through this process. The first question is very obvious. Do I have to participate in this roster verification process? And the answer is yes, if you are a teacher who has direct instructional responsibility for students in a tested subject. That includes your AIG teachers or your teachers who typically pull students out. So if when they are pulling them out, they are teaching them math or teaching them reading, then they also need to create a roster. And they need to put in the percentage of time that they have the students, and again, they need to work directly with the teacher of record so that they can come to a common agreement about what that percentage is going to be, if it's a 60-40 split or a 70-30 split. Please tell your teachers they don't have to claim students 37.52% of the time. Like, they don't have to be that precise, because the analysis for the teacher value added report does allow a margin of error. So get close, as close as you can, but don't tell them not to stress, and don't allow them to stress. It doesn't have to be like 100% accurate in terms of that, because there is some margin of error. But as long as whoever is working with the student, if they are teaching them the content, the core content areas, then they should create a roster. And so that's important for administrators to know, because during that preview phase, chances are your special teachers, your AIG, your ELL, your spec ed teachers are not going to have rosters. So go ahead and create those rosters for them and make sure that their accounts are listed. That will save a whole lot of time and frustration in the end, by the time the teachers get to this page. What value should be entered in the student-teacher assignment and your percent of instruction? Like, that's the main question. You can see, if you guys have that open on question 5, if you look at question 5, it is a very long response. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to pull the document up right now and share that question. So on question 5, you can see it's a long response. And so this is where it's going to depend on the situation with the teacher. It depends on who else is touching that student, who else is teaching that student, and the teacher has to collaborate with those other people. They have to sit together and talk about it. Now, DPI has given us some scenarios that are very useful. And you can see over here on the right, like, here's a sample, there's a link that says sample scenario. If I'm going to click on that, and it pretty much covers a lot of the scenarios with what can happen with the student. So this is what it actually looks like when the teacher goes in to add their percentages. So you can see the student's name, the teacher assignment. So this is a fillable box. So the teacher, if the teacher and the student have been together, the student has been enrolled in the teacher's classroom all year, then that number would be 100%. But if the student came in midway through the year, then that number would drop down to 50%. And then the same thing for the teacher. If the teacher has been available to the student 100% of the time, then it's going to be 100%. So this teacher was there all year, the student was there all year, so 100%. If the teacher is new to the building and they were hired midway through, then it's going to be 50%. So the student might be at 100% because they were in school, but the teacher could be at 50%. And so you can see it's really going to depend on the situation. So I urge you to go through here and look at some of these scenarios, because see, they have them if you departmentalize at your school. If you co-teach at your school, there's a scenario for that. If there's specialists, multiple specialists providing, so that means if a student is ELL and spec ed, and they are also in the regular classroom, that's 3 people touching that student. So then the 3 of them will need to come together and come to a consensus on what percentage we need to each claim for the student. So these scenarios are very helpful. And then when you go all the way down to the actual scenario, it even gives you a little bit of a formula that tells you how to actually calculate what that percentage should be. Now, your veteran teachers, they have this down packed, and they don't listen to me. That 37.52, they got it, and it's 100% exact. Let them do their thing if that's what they, if they've been keeping their records and they know that that's the way it is. Because they've been doing this for a while, and so they figured out, how to go through the process. Other teachers, like I said, don't let them get frustrated or too bogged down in getting the numbers exactly right. They can approximate, but here's an EC teacher, and it also applies to AIG and ESL in a regular classroom. So there's a scenario that that talks about that. So definitely make this document available to your teachers and tell them to find the scenario that best fits their situation, because it even gives you like how many minutes it should be if you're typically pulling the students out. An AIG provides 45 minutes of math instruction outside of the classroom 3 times a week. That's 135 minutes a week. So all of that information is there for you. And once they, have a clear understanding of what it is that they're doing, it's going to come natural to them. The other question, just going back to my PowerPoint. You're going to get the question, what should teachers do if they're trying to add a student in the roster, but EVAAS says the student can't be found? That's okay, because there are certain dates that the EVAAS system is going to update the enrollment. So if a student is not there right now, and teachers will get a little squirrely because some of the enrollment dates are after the teacher verification window. So like I mentioned, the window is closing on the 29th. But if DPI hasn't updated the EVAAS roster enrollment, the students in EVAAS, if they say that they're not going to update it until February 3rd, that's okay, because as the principal or the roster verifier, even though the teachers' rosters have been pulled from them, you can send that roster back to the teacher and let them make the change once the student is added into the system. Okay, so there's still time for them to do that. I'm going to pause here for a second to see if there is a question that I have not covered that you'd like for me to go over. And just go ahead and unmic your phone and your audio, and let me know and ask the question.
If we have a student, I teach in elementary school, that has very, very, very little attendance. We're talking maybe 10 days out of a quarter or less. What does the teacher do? Do they claim them at 100% or like 10%?
Yes, thank you for asking that question, because that's actually another question that I have on the screen. How is daily attendance addressed in the roster verification? I forgot to put what number this is on the FAQ document, but keep in mind that enrollment and attendance are 2 different things. We have to account for every student that's enrolled. Attendance is not a factor. So unfortunately, that student who doesn't come to school, we still have to claim them at 100%, even though that they only came to school 3 days out of the year, whatever it is. So you cannot adjust the percentages to account for students who don't come to school. So that's not going to make teachers very happy, because that student has not been in school, but that's, that is the rule that DPI has said. Thank you for that question. Other questions?
Sonia, this is Bob Grant. Can you just clarify that last piece? So I know that number of days of attendance didn't matter when looking at EVAAS, but you're saying that even if a student never came into the building?
If they are listed as being enrolled in your school, then yes, they have to be claimed. Now, if you can go into the system and, I know you don't count students as dropouts at the elementary level, but because they're in Power School as being enrolled. Okay. So we have to count them.
What thoughts have you in data and accountability, or have any of the folks like the chiefs had around the messaging for EVAAS this year? Because I feel that what we're doing right now is the nuts and bolts, how to record the percentages and so forth, and that's going to be helpful because we're going to have to do it. But from my perspective as a building principal, the data that we're getting from it is not legitimate, that we're going to be having for our kids. They've moved back and forth between multiple teachers, from virtual learning to in-school learning to kids not being present. I mean, a whole range of factors. And I think to be fair to teachers who are under an enormous amount of stress, I think messaging will be important from the district. I know I plan on giving my own messaging, but from the district around, hey, we know that you're doing the best that you can during the pandemic. This is the reality that, yes, we still have to record EVAAS, but please take to heart that in this language is, of course, how you're phrasing it. But I'm telling my staff, I'm not holding you accountable for your EVAAS scores, to be straight up. Yeah. That every year I meet with them and we go through EVAAS scores and who's in red and who's not. We look at data and I have one-on-one meetings. I'm not doing that this year because it's not fair to them.
Yeah.
And so I think that staff, in whatever messaging the district can come up with that can have that type of wording, because otherwise you feel like you're in this zero sum win situation. You just can't win, and that they're going to be unfairly held accountable. So
yes, absolutely. And I appreciate those comments. We haven't given any message about EVAAS, if you notice. This is probably the first thing, other than the emails that have come out about the fall roster verification system. But I felt like we needed to at least, go through this process to make sure, because we still have to go through the process. But the superintendent hasn't said much about growth, and I think it's because we haven't gotten any messaging from DPI yet. Like, we don't know exactly 100% that. We feel like iStation is going to be used for our K2 data. But we haven't gotten anything from DPI, and I think our leadership is waiting to hear like what DPI is going to tell us, and then we'll send out what the message is. But I feel like Bob, that the message is going to be just as you described, because this has just been a year that is not like no other. Right. Unless you want to say it's like the other half of 1920, yep. Which is when the pandemic started,
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. And I think that will be important before we start to get all the information about roster. I've been getting the ones for the fall, and I ignore those because I'm not a high school principal. But when we start to get the ones for the spring, and then people are going to start to schedule meetings with their staff to go through and figure all this out. And so I think to be preemptive about it and have that come out will be valuable. So thank you.
Yep. Okay. And I'll talk with Brad about that, and we can figure something out. I knew we were going to reach our 4 o'clock time frame very quickly. So for those of you who have to go, feel free to go ahead and log off. I will send out a copy of this PowerPoint. The only other slide that I had was just the link to where you are in EVAAS right now, where the FAQ document is, the sample scenarios. Take a look at the worksheet for, I'm going to actually click on the one for year-long courses. I just want you to see this, because whether it's the student or the teacher that's coming in and out of the building, you don't have to figure out what day they came. Well, you do need to know what day they started, whether it's the student or the teacher, but you don't have to figure out the percentage because it's already done for you. So this is based on 180 days. And so if a teacher came in based on her start date, let's say if she came in at day 54, then there's the percentage for you right there. So this is a very useful tool that they can use that will help them right off the bat to figure out whether it's the student or the teacher, what percentage goes in that little box. So I wanted to show you that. And then, and there's one for the semester long courses, and then the sample scenarios, or the FAQ guide, the sample scenarios, and then these semester long courses are really important and will help you to support your teachers. So I'm willing to stay on a little longer if you guys have other questions. I think I covered the attendance question. Is there anything else? If a teacher goes out on maternity leave, then you would use, and whenever she comes back, then you would use that worksheet to figure that out. Other questions? I'll let you ask me questions. And it's one of those things that you don't know what questions you're going to have until you actually get into the system. And let me just show you this really quickly in the system. That was the other thing I wanted to show you, if I can find it. Let's see. Yeah. What it looks like when I said that you can't have, so this is what it looks like on my end. So these are my overclaimed schools who have overclaimed students. So I see what schools and how many students that they have overclaimed. And so I can click on that and it will tell me the student. If I click on the student's name, and so you as administrators, you will be able to see this as well. So here you can clearly see that 2 teachers from Fuquay are trying to claim the student at 100%. So that's very easy. And in the actual teachers portal, there will be a little triangle that's in yellow that lets you know that the student is being overclaimed. And so these boxes will be fillable. So they would need to go in and decrease that amount so that it brings it back down to 100%. And then for the same is true for underclaimed students. So it's okay to have underclaimed, you just can't have overclaimed. So these underclaimed students, it's the same situation. So if you click on the student's name, here this teacher, for some reason, chose 95%. But sometimes it might, as a principal, it might say 30%. Well, that's a red, that should raise your eyebrow, because if the teacher's been in the building for the whole year, they didn't have any extended period of time that they were out of the building, then, they should be at 100% or somewhere close to that. And there is some guidance in the FAQ document that talks about how much time. So if a teacher has missed 20 days or 30 days, like there's some specific guidance. There's a little table that's in one of the FAQ documents that provides you with that guidance. So if a teacher says, well, I went on vacation for 3 weeks, although, I don't know any teachers who go on vacation for 3 weeks, but if for some reason they did, then they can take that time out of their, of their allotment. The main thing for you as the principal, or if you are the roster verifier, if the students are underclaimed, there should be a reason. Now, no one is going to ask you for that reason, but I suggest to principals that you have the documentation or make a note somewhere that you're keeping, that that the student was on, the teacher was on maternity leave, or the teacher broke her arm and she was, out for 4 weeks, or, whatever the situation, or she was out because of personal, for personal reasons. So just keep that documentation, and then that would be your verification as to why you allow the teacher to underclaim a student. Because the main thing is that they don't want teachers trying not to claim students for whatever reasons. Unfortunately, there are, some reasons where we don't want to claim all of our wonderful boys and girls that we have. Okay, so I am done. If you have other questions, I can stay online. The last thing I will tell you is our next session is February 9th. From 3:30 to 4, and we're going to be talking about the SOAR roster. So that's a repeat of one that we've done in the past, but that's where you actually go in to get your student rosters with all of your, that has information on all of your students who are currently in your building, or those students who were previously in your buildings. So please feel free to join us on that day. We'll go through those rosters for you. And if you have other questions, then go ahead and ask. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.